I can't wait for you to tune in to what Lili Vasileff has to say about financial infidelity and whether or not you should forgive it. What she helps uncover in this episode of DCM, Decoding the Conflict Mindset, is that there are many layers of infidelity when it comes to finances, some in ways that we don't even give a second thought to. What Lili and I talk about are the emotional aspects of financial infidelity, things like guilt, hurt, lack of trust, entitlement, and many more. And so just how do we navigate people through these difficult issues? Well, Lili provides some tips, particularly around the financial elements, because almost any divorce has some issues around financial management. So listen to one of the best, one of the experts, founder in her field, a leader in her field, and what she brings to understanding the conflict mindset, particularly in financial infidelity and pending divorce. Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, with Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Welcome, Lili.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. I am so excited to delve into our topic, which is how are you at financial risk and should you forgive financial infidelity? Whoa, that's a very powerful topic and probably one many people don't consider. So Lili, let me share with our listeners a little bit about your background so they have some idea of what you have to offer in this really rich and exciting topic. So Lili is a pioneer in divorce financial planning, and that is actually a recent development in the last, would you say 10 or 15 years, Lili, as far as
Yes.
that whole? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't around when I first started in divorce assistance mediation, but it's a tremendous asset to the divorce process because you have skills and abilities that the rest of us don't bring. But you really have helped build a financial niche community with now thousands of trained practitioners. So the field has grown widely and much needed. She's the founder and president of Allie's Dream, 501c3 business that is a day service program for adults with developmental delays. Well, that's a whole other twist. So you have to tell us more about that too. And so, well, I'm sorry to hear that you truly dislike sushi because I like sushi. So, okay, well, we don't need to get into conflict over that one, do we? Right?
No.
Lili, you're one of those certified financial planners, CFPs, also with a master's in financial forensics, which is amazing, specializing in matrimonial litigation, certified divorce financial analyst, and president of Wealth Protection Management based in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Yes.
And it's cold there right now.
It's freezing. It's about 8 below, so it's not a happy time.
Oh my goodness, that is really very cold. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And wonderfully, you're also trained as a mediator. And so I'm just really impressed with the rich background you bring and that whole area of the financial aspects and financial infidelity is truly intriguing. And so first, let me ask you, how did you get into this line of work?
Into divorce financial planning.
Yes.
Back word. I'll tell you straight out. I went through a pretty gruesome divorce myself many years ago, raised my children as a single parent. And I found that the process was absolutely horrific in that I didn't learn anything from it. I was actually penalized by what my own attorneys didn't know. And being a financial person even then, I literally ended up doing my own divorce with their umbrella over my head. And I thought, you know what? I used to be a zealot, a real zealot back then. And I said, there has got to be a better way in this world. There just has to be a process by which you don't feel decimated at the end of it, that you've got better choices to make and have a roadmap for your own financial confidence and security. And I had wonderful support from people. And I went out and I started doing it, not knowing what it was called. And gradually, and lo and behold, we now have an industry around it that I am very proud of, where we have standards and ethics and protocols, and everyone can expect a comparable menu of services from any divorce financial planner. And that's huge to me because we do make a difference. And you as a mediator and I as a mediator know that often this specialty or an expertise of someone who could be a neutral in a process is so fundamentally valuable to a couple who relies on that safe space, that trust with a neutral, the trust with a mediator. And so, grassroots has evolved where we have mediation, we have collaborative divorce, and we are welcome in these legal processes and we're needed in them. And I'm just very proud of all of my peers of how much we contribute to a better divorce.
Well, I'm glad that you are one of those forerunners then, because like you, having gone through a divorce and I was married to a litigator, we ended up both having attorneys, even though I tried to go to mediation. And if I had only had the kind of team that today's divorce world offers, what a different world it would have been.
Yes.
Because, like you, I also ended up negotiating a lot of the financial aspects of my divorce, even though finance is not my expertise. Counseling and parenting and those kinds of things are. And, our attorneys were experienced, but they again, that's where I do a lot of work is supporting attorneys and mediators who don't understand the people side of things because they contribute many times to the decimation of what the aftermath of divorce is all about. And so thank you so much for what you do. And sorry you had to go through your experience.
It's my passion. What can I tell you?
Yeah. And so I'm curious, this whole topic, financial infidelity. Say more about that.
So there's different gradations, but financial infidelity, just to be clear at the outset, is not financial abuse. That's a very different kind of dangerous risk. Financial infidelity is a big spectrum, right? And it comes down to behavior. That's really what it's all about. It's the secretive act of something, of doing something with money, whether you are siphoning off a paycheck to a secret account, whether you're opening a lot of credit cards that your spouse doesn't know about or your significant partner, whether you are gifting monies away that you were told you couldn't afford, whether you have an addiction that is dissipating your wealth. So there's a wide spectrum of what it is, but the point of it is that it's about behavior. So it's not about the money, it's about something else. And you know this better than probably all of us, but it's something that's underneath that drives somebody to have a pattern of behavior where they feel as if they can't be communicating about it with their significant other. And that is where the danger is. That's where the risk lies. And it's not obvious. Many times it's not obvious until it's too late.
Yeah. And in divorce, that's where oftentimes people may spend exorbitant amounts of money to uncover those kinds of patterns of behavior to find the truth behind that.
It's always the moment of where you hear ping and the bomb goes off, right? It's on the table and they're in shock because they had no clue about what their finances look like. And they're now having somebody else like me tell them what it's all about. And can you imagine, the feelings better than anyone, the feeling of having judgment passed on you, the shame, being caught, the rationalization of why it is what it is. It doesn't always have to end in divorce, though. That's why I think it would be fun to talk about sort of the various options that I've seen so many couples consider in addition to divorce. But divorce is where it's laid out on the table for everybody to see. And that's when you're naked. And that's when it really has the biggest impact of, can this be resolved for two people going separate ways, rather than finding what you just mentioned, which was, can you forgive it, or can you overcome it, or can you stay together and work through it?
Well, when we talk about infidelity, we often think about, relationship infidelity, and that's the whole area too. Is that, does it always have to end in separation and divorce? And I know helping people get through that is a very challenging thing. And I imagine it's no different for financial infidelity. Can I trust? Because it really gets down to, can I trust this person again? And, when you were talking about some of the, the emotional factors that came up, I also thought of guilt, self-loathing,
Yes.
negative self-esteem. And so those are hard things to recover from as well.
It's really tough. And I think you hit it on the head, which is to say that most couples have a little bit of financial infidelity somewhere, right? Like I have a little savings account where I put extra cash just for a rainy day. Or, you know what, my adult children ask me for money. I don't want to bother, my other person. I'm just going to, there's harmless sort of financial infidelity. And then there's a little bit more serious, right? And I think that given the perception of what that impact is on that gradation of what financial infidelity is, helps probably determine whether or not you can forgive, work through it, get to a better place, or it's unacceptable and unforgivable. And I can share with you some crazy stories that I've had in couples, and I'd love to ask you which ones you think end in divorce and which ones do you think people work through. Can I
yeah, let's take one of each, and I would love to
Okay.
hear. I think that'd be great.
Okay, I'll give you the first one. Lovely couple. The wife suddenly discovered that when she went to use a credit card or write a check, that there were no funds. They were all canceled. So she spoke to me about financial planning because she wasn't really sure what was going on. And I sat with her and her husband, and he had been going to work every day for 2 years, suit, tie, suitcase, out the door, no job. Spent all of their savings, spent all of their retirement accounts. All of the cars were being repossessed. They were all leased. They were being all repossessed, and they had warning signs everywhere. He never shared it. And when he blurted this out, he was sobbing on the table that this burden of not having a job was on his shoulders alone, and he couldn't bear to scare his family. And now here she was looking at him from across the table going, we have nothing? Like literally we have nothing. And that's one story. The other story is about a gentleman who went to gambling. He had a gambling addiction and went through all of their retirement accounts. And the wife caught it and called me and said, what am I supposed to do with this? We've been saving for 30 years. We have nothing. We're on the cusp of retirement. And he's sick. And I love him. What do I do? Those are two very different kinds of stories. And which one do you think ended in divorce?
Well, for me, it's a toss-up, 50-50. I guess I'm sort of thinking the second one survived. The first one did not. That's my speculation.
Neither one.
Oh.
They both worked it through.
Okay.
And I helped them figure out where the guardrails were to get back on track together to work through the problem. Now I'll give you the third story that did end in divorce. This was a story of a person who had extreme control over his spouse, gave her an allowance, asked her to fill out an Excel spreadsheet every single month over money. They disagreed on almost every aspect of spending. And she felt completely like choking, being controlled as to accounting for everything, and began to open new credit cards in her own name, began to go, asking people for borrowing money just so she could have cash to do what she wanted to do apart from this. That marriage ended in divorce. And so, it's across the board, right? You never know how people forgive.
Yeah.
What we can work through.
Well, it reminds me, I'm sure, you are familiar, and probably our viewers and listeners are familiar as well, but, Grace and Frankie, for example,
Yes,
we know why they divorced, but they had the credit cards, snipped apart, but then I'm also thinking of Sleeping with the Enemy with Julia Roberts that came out a number of years ago. But she was exactly like the third story that you talked about as far as having just to escape it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, you have to be patient to really listen to the layers of, to peel off the layers of the onion to get to where and why this all occurred. And I think many times, and I'd love your opinion on this, many times financial infidelity just comes about because there's a perceived opportunity. It's not so hard for me to write a check to my adult child when they really need it, right? I'll make it up later. Or they rationalize it like, you know what? I gambled, I'm just going to double up to regain it, right? Or then there's the idea that, even maybe I deserve this. So, why can't I do this? And I think, I don't know, have I hit all the good reasons? But I think I think infidelity is just such a moving target. And it can be small, it can be big. And I remember reading a survey somewhere that said like nearly half of all married couples experience some little piece of infidelity along the way, financial infidelity, right? And I'm assuming it's not the big one, right? But the smaller kind. So I guess it's pretty prevalent.
Well, I think, it gets into, a bunch of words came up to my mind as you were, saying some things, one is, again, entitlement, for example, I deserve this,
Yep.
or, denial, this isn't really as big of a problem. I can take care of it in another way, or a lack of transparency or genuineness, also I'm thinking about intentionality or non-intentionality. We may do things and not be intentional about it, but it still has its outcomes, that can impact others significantly and negatively. And so it's really, to me, it goes back to emotional intelligence as far as how well do you know yourself? How well do you manage yourself? How well do you, know and read others? And how well do you manage that relationship? So it really does come to me. This is what a lot of the work I do with couples is, showing up with integrity. We oftentimes treat the very ones we love the most, the worst. And so it's like,
interesting.
How, if we really love this person, we should be elevating them up to a place of respect and not on a pedestal per se, but at least, treating them with respect because we care and have concern for them, and to do things then that are in support of them, not adverse to them. And yet we oftentimes don't connect our actions and our behaviors to our mindset, and then and recognize the outcome or the impact it has on others. And so that intentionality is really key in my work: integrity, genuineness, transparency. And so that takes me to a couple questions here.
Sure.
You talked about these things arising. So how would somebody protect themselves before the need arises? But then what do you do after somebody, as I think you referred to as a predator, is successful in doing it?
All right. I think that's two parts.
Yes, there are.
So the first one is, how do you protect yourself before you think you're too deep, right, into a mess? Well, you talked about awareness and emotional intelligence. You want to put your finger in the pulse of, is there communication and connection between who you love and what's happening? And are you aware? And have you abdicated your own responsibility by not doing that? And that's a hard reckoning as well, right? To let somebody say, oh, they do everything and I do this. And then you find out and you say, wow, where's the blame to be? It should be shared because you gave it away. My question is, you start by taking the chips off the table, making sure that you know where everything is. You need to keep track of your well-being as if you are being held responsible for your own well-being. That is your job. And I think it kind of harkens back to the fact that I don't think many people come into a relationship with eyes open about how to communicate well. Money is always that one thorn that everybody points a finger to that people don't communicate well about, and make that special effort to set up a process by which you're not antagonized and you're not in conflict and you're not sort of in a deficit position of coming to the table just to share what's happening financially. That's part of what that responsibility is. So knowing your passwords, knowing your accounts, checking them regularly, making sure that you do your credit reports, knowing how assets are legally titled, what property is held in whose name. Crazy things that people find out in divorce are, for example, somebody took out a second mortgage or a HELOC on a house and they had no idea about it. And now their house is leveraged and there's no equity. The other one is taking out credit cards, and they have 32 credit cards and they never knew that their spouse had that much debt outstanding. There's crazy stories everywhere. So getting a handle on what goes on, both day to day as well as long-term planning, is important. You mentioned integrity and respect and connecting. And you know what? That's the game plan. You have to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent suggestions, and certainly, a mindset that I advocate also with couples, as far as, that not so much about honesty, but integrity.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what happens then, when you find out this stuff is happening? What can you do about it?
Well, you can always go to a professional to work through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You, me, whomever. Mm-hmm. There are many different kinds of resolutions, whether you want to stay together and have things commingled, whether you want to stay together and disentangle financially, so you control your own financial destiny, whether you do go down a different path that starts planning for if and when, like a post-nuptial agreement. You can set the terms of what will happen to bring you together and what will happen if you fall apart, right? It's a middle ground that sets forward a lot of terms that you can then measure your goals against and figure out whether or not you're making progress. If you're not making progress and you're heading toward divorce, you're in divorce. By the time you get to a divorce position, whatever's happened. And there's a very strong predisposition that if you didn't kick and scream along the way, that when you're in divorce, it's almost as if, well, you were married. Didn't you condone it? I mean, didn't you know what was going on? Like, where were you?
Yeah.
So it doesn't help to get to that very end part. So you need to be on your game. And always remember, if you do end up in divorce, you're still going to be responsible for yourself. So why not start in a more positive place and start taking back some of that knowledge for yourself and getting back control piece?
Excellent points. You raised a term that I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on, because I perceive that perhaps a lot of people are not familiar with it, but we've all heard about prenuptials before you get married.
Yes.
But you talked about a postnuptial.
Yes.
And I always encourage people, if they're contemplating should they get divorced or not, I encourage them to take a good 12 to 15 weeks to really work through some emotion-focused therapy in terms of what's led to this point, and not to live in the past, but instead look at what helped contribute this, and then what can be done about it, and then how can we shape the future forward. I was saying it takes two to tango, but only one to change the direction of the dance.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
that's actually perfect. Yes.
So describe a little bit more about, when does the postnuptial come into play? Is it while they're still married? Is it when they're contemplating divorce, or what?
The postnuptial agreement is very much like a prenuptial agreement, except you are married while you're entering into this agreement. And a postnuptial agreement, it basically covers divorce, death, disability, your intentions on what you would like taken care of, how you want it taken care of, who gets what. And it has a little bit of a bad rap because, yes, many people have postnuptial agreements because fault has occurred, right? It's not because you're happy, you're doing it to set something right. So because fault has occurred, there's very strong association of postnuptial agreements being the precursor of a divorce, right?
Okay.
It doesn't have to be,
okay,
but often it is. I did a postnuptial agreement for a couple, second marriage for both, and they found out that some of the assets were being dissipated by an ex-wife. And they wanted to very clearly set forward the terms by which their savings, which were both being used to satisfy whatever was happening here, would be replenished back to the new wife, so that as she spends her monies on his ex-wife, she would be replenished. That's a good postnuptial. He gets liquidity, she gets reimbursed. It's very clear whose money is what. And why it was done. It was done with all the best of intentions. So postnuptials can be a very positive tool. And that's why I mentioned with financial infidelity, there's a lot of tools out there that you don't need to necessarily think only of divorce. And if you can forgive that infidelity, if you can work through it with someone like yourself or someone like me, then we have trust that you could establish. You have postnuptial agreements. You have various different kinds of protections that can also help clarify really where you want to be.
It sounds, I would say it's not rocket science, and it's not, but it is a clear, logical, methodical, structured approach to thinking through challenging issues, right?
Yes.
And so, and oftentimes people don't know how to have those conversations. And one of the things I oftentimes find, I use an iceberg analogy a lot in terms of, the tip of the iceberg is what you see.
Yes.
And
Yes.
over my years of experience as a psychologist and a mediator, I find that most people are in their relationships, whether it's their marital, even friendship or in business relationships, that they oftentimes react to what's happening at the tip of the iceberg. Our behavior that we display, the tone, volume, and inflection that we express through our voice, and then the words that we use. And so we react to that. And then we either fight back or we withdraw, instead of diving deeper into more of the beliefs and expectations and attitudes, assumptions, concerns and challenges, hopes, fears, values, and needs. We don't have those kinds of conversations very often. And certainly, I think people become very fearful about asking questions, but oftentimes they're not the right kinds of questions. And so, people do tend to react. And so it really is sort of slowing down the pace and then helping people have effective, I like to say, let's have how to have communication, not confrontation.
Yes.
And so it's really helping people go dive deeper. And so working with somebody like you can really help them safely explore the financial aspects of the relationship and how people are respectively impacted and so forth. Yeah. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you hit all the reasons why I love doing this. Numbers are just numbers. Every number has a color behind it, right? It has a story. And I think the industry in divorce, in marital planning has moved to be much more sensitive, to require us to be more curious, to train us on how to ask some of the more pertinent questions. Because as you mentioned, when one person is doing this or two people are doing this, their perception is their reality. That's what they stick to, right? That's what it is. That's their story, and it's very real for them. And to help them, it often takes another third person, a neutral person, to come into this mix that kind of shake up a little bit of the dynamics and then to start asking those deeper questions that you just said. And it's not easy for two people to communicate. I mean, I used to laugh when I read these financial magazines that said, what's wrong with money conflicts? Well, people don't communicate. Well, yes, that's true. You're not helping them by saying that. So,
yeah.
It's like, yeah. But, this financial infidelity is one of those, I guess, symptoms that is about one's perception. It happens all the time. It could be small, it could be big. It's something that needs to be dealt with as soon as possible, because it only grows and it only deepens. And maybe you're just seeing that tip of the iceberg of that one little thing. Oh, you have a new credit card from this store. Where have you been shopping, right? It could be the 50 credit cards. So yes, I totally agree with what you were saying about having this mindset of where you work with individuals to help them get through whatever that perception is, to get to a deeper place. And I'm not a psychologist, and I'm certainly not a psychiatrist, but I ask enough questions. I'm very curious. And language is very important, because they both have to feel safe when you do this.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, words matter, how you show up matters,
Yes.
and money is one of the number one issues that couples fight about. And so it is really critically important to, recognize where you are. To add to your curious piece, I like to say it takes
Yeah,
courage to be
it
curious.
does. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
And it takes courage to listen,
Yes. Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm curious. We've all heard your stories about how people can work it through, particularly with the expertise of someone like yourself, but how it also can lead into divorce. I think I'm curious, and I imagine our listeners may be curious as well. But what are some examples, or one or two, of how someone like yourself, a divorce financial expert, actually helped reinvent the roadmap to a couple's finances?
It often helps to find a starting point of consensus between a couple. What's most important? To really define priorities and interests, and then to look at the resources of what they require to start achieving some of that. Often their goals could be here, and how they're going about it is that way, and they're going in the wrong direction, or again, they don't have enough knowledge of options. And so working through different options and prioritizing different pieces, you kind of put the pieces of a puzzle together. And when it's together, it's together. And it won't be together until everything's laid out, right? That's one part. The technical part of financial knowledge, knowing what the tax impact is, knowing what short-term versus long-term consequences are, knowing how to squeeze cash flow from certain resources versus looking at saving for a longer term. That's the technical piece. And I'm sure many of my peers are excellent and by far cleverer than I am. But you have to put it together with really what is going on that will make this team couple work. And that's what fascinates me. And it fascinates me on a bigger scale because many individuals who go through the divorce process and then, I love it, are optimists and remarry, they carry that same baggage. They carry not only the baggage of what they never understood why it didn't work, but now it's been exasperated by a horrible divorce experience for the most part. So they even are like wearing two hats of ick when it comes to money, right? And I love that part because I think that's the critical part where you can make the biggest difference on remarriages and a blended family, of coming in with the right tools of helping people walk through this walk and get on a roadmap.
Yeah. I love what you had to say there, because I just said this to a friend the other day, in fact, is that, I always caution people, as much hurt and what, it's oftentimes emotional hurt that we, deal with when we find our marriages and successful. But we oftentimes, leave one marriage and are, longing, panging for, emotional closeness again and feeling cared for and loved again. And too many people rush into a second marriage, too soon. And particularly for men, there's, higher incidence of remarriage earlier for men than women. And yet it's not taking the time to really look at, well, what worked and what didn't work. What baggage am I carrying over, that I'm into this new relationship because of things I haven't resolved yet. And so I always talk about it from more of the emotional, relationship side of things, but absolutely true from the financial thing too, because and by not spending enough time reflecting on what worked, what didn't, and not to lay blame and shame, which is too often the outcome of a failed relationship, whether it's for emotional or financial reasons. But I believe that that's why, the rate for second divorces is even higher than the rate for first divorce.
Much higher.
Higher.
Much higher.
If I recall, it's like 55% of first-time marriages end in divorce. I think it jumps up to 73% for second marriages. And then, unfortunately, even higher for third marriages at 78%, I believe.
I'm an optimist for love, but I wish it wasn't that way, but it is.
I know.
I think your point about courage, that's when the courage steps in, is to let go and start fresh of learning really what your own values are and how to manage behaviors in conjunction with a new partner. And I love working on prenuptial agreements for remarried people because they put a huge amount of effort into it. And I really go through all kinds of crazy stuff like, what if you're disabled and you have a small child? Do you want your other new partner to be the primary person taking care of that child, or whatever? And I love that part because I'm seeing a good start. Really, I'm seeing a communication that is very clear. That's very clear, and they can recognize differences, and they can express them, and there can be conflicts. And how do we resolve them or leave them open? That's the learning piece. That's so needed.
Yeah, I mean, just by the nibbles you put out there, there are so many things that can be explored, and again, questions to be asked with the guided expertise of someone like yourself. I know that you're an author of some books, and so tell us a little bit about your books, how people could contact you, and where else can you? Because I know we met each other through our mutual colleague Susan Guthrie on her podcast, Beyond Divorce. And so, how can people find you, and what resources do you have to offer?
Thank you for asking. So I'm actually the author of 4 books on divorce: Money in Divorce, The Divorce Organizer, The Divorce the Divorce Planner Checklist, and also this new one, Divorce and Separation, which is just relevant to Connecticut. All of them are at Amazon. And I wrote Money in Divorce at the invitation of the American Bar Association, which I was very thrilled to do as being recognized as a divorce financial expert. It is literally a step-by-step guide through divorce on every financial issue you can imagine. Tips, mistakes, different perspectives, option building, what to expect. And I'm very happy with it because the amount of research that went into that, I found that there were no other books out there on just financial issues. And so I was thrilled to do that. And the other books are really like the Divorce Planner or the Divorce Organizer. It's just like a wedding planner organizer. We were invited by the publisher to create one for divorce, which made me laugh. But it's where you stick your little business cards in when you interview people, you make your notes. It tells you what to do first, second, third, and it's a loose leaf notebook, and you stick it in your trunk in your car, and you can do whatever you need to hide what you gather about fact finding for divorce. So thank you. And my website is wealthprotectionmanagement.com. And I do work with clients and professionals across the country. I'm very honored to be sort of a go-to expert, since I've been in the field for a very long time, on complicated, high net worth kinds of divorces where finances are very complex.
Yes. Well, Lili, just a wealth of information, and I've long done workshops on divorce planning and things like that as well. And so one thing I do want to emphasize to our listeners and viewers that it does require planning. You just don't say, "Oh, I want a divorce," because that's probably not the way to handle it. I know it's not, and that it really is a team sport. You really do need some legal guidance. You need some financial guidance. You need some emotional guidance. And as well as navigating through. And if you have children, then you need some parenting guidance as well. And so that's where, really thinking about your team. And I love the idea of your divorce planner checklist, because that really does help people think through, because you've never done it before. Well, how do you know what needs to be done? And the world of divorce has changed. And so, how people get divorced today is very different than it was 15, 20 years ago when I went through my divorce. And
I hope so.
So do I.
From both of our perspectives, I really hope it's a lot better.
It's people like you and me that made a difference, okay?
Yes.
Well, Lili, this has been absolutely wonderful to have you here. And I look forward to further collaboration with you. I've already got some ideas about, I think I know what we could do here. And so I'm so glad that we got the introduction through Susan, and love having you here. And so for our listeners and viewers, if you are contemplating whether this marriage can work, or maybe you found out that there's some financial infidelity, don't despair, reach out and get care, because there are people out there that can help you and guide you. And again, with Lili's books, resources to learn about and, contemplate your options. And she gave 2 great examples of how what could have easily been divorce options were salvageable. And, and that's what, living happy and healthy is really what it's all about. And so making choices to take us in those directions rather than leading to destruction. So learn to communicate rather than be confrontational. And so hopefully you've learned a little bit about decoding the conflict mindset in today's episode. So if you like what you hear, please pass it on. Let your friends and colleagues know about this. And if you want to learn more, please subscribe. The link's below. And welcome back for our next showing. And Lili, thank you again.
Thank you. You're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we just learned some valuable tips from Lili Vasileff when it comes to the dirty little secrets of financial infidelity. Well, continuing on that pathway, we're going to take another look at people going through divorce, but this time from the lens of a coach who specializes in working with men. I believe she may be the only one to specialize in working only with men. She tries to provide them with unbiased, unconditional support and guidance and accountability so that they can make better decisions as they navigate through the divorce process. Where does Haley Lisa Botha get her experience from? Well, as many of us, from our own experiences dealing with divorce. She's been through too. So listen and learn from what Haley Lisa has to offer and the insights that she provides to working with men going through difficult challenges, whether it's going through divorce as well as how they show up as leaders. This is an episode you don't want to miss, like with all of them, but again, a little different twist on how we show up and how life events impact us. So subscribe now, be the first to be notified of our next event with Haley Lisa Botha.